Dr. Somadoda Fikeni. Dr. Fikeni, thank you so much for making the time to join us this morning. Your thoughts about this conversation as soon as legal counsel, Mr. Skakani, went onto the podium yesterday morning. He said he was there, his client was there to answer on questions of fraud and corruption, but they were not so sure about state capture. Your thoughts?
Well, I do think that the most important thing that ought to happen is for everyone participating to present evidence such that in the end the judge could say yes there was or no there was no state capture. That there seemed to be an argument over semantics which has been taking place over the years is neither here nor there, nor is it fundamentally important as to what the name you give to it. And the second part, state capture, actually, it's when leaders or individuals in key positions of government work together with the private sector for private interest to repurpose the functioning of the state. And then they create a parallel system to the formal system, and that includes weakening of the institutions while centralizing power to individuals. And it doesn't necessarily say it should be legislature, it should be the executive or judiciary. Most important for that threshold to be met is the impact. State capture can happen if you just have the military and the treasury. It would happen if you have certain areas, as long as it has so much impact that it begins to create a deep state, it begins to weaken the very functioning of the state.
The fact that former President Jacob Zuma has previously been to the courts to challenge the content and the format of the Public Protector's report that got us this far, and he didn't succeed in that challenge, and he still brings this up. What does this tell us about his thought process at the moment and his posture?
Well, I do think that he believes, and I think he sincerely believes, that there is a giant conspiracy against him, and he therefore spends most of the time on how to survive and how to preserve himself. And very little of that time is spent on broader issues of accountability, on leadership and vision. Precisely because of that, that might become the legacy that he leaves behind, because it doesn't matter at times whether you are legally guilty or not. Once you realize as a leader that there was so much widespread corruption, there was effort to repurpose the state, you take political accountability, even if you do not take the legal accountability, to say, now that I know so much happened under my watch against the state interest, I do take accountability, or I do regret, or I would have done A, B, C, D, E. That doesn't seem to matter to him. The main thing is him and his survival and the conspiracies against him.
What should we make of the beginning of his testimony, where he outlined historical events, some of them that took place about 20 years ago, that he remembered to the T, but wasn't able to remember more recent events, such as whether he made that call to Themba Maseko or not?
That's precisely the point of survival, as well as the belief in the conspiracy. You would remember what happened in the 70s, in the 80s, and so forth, if it helps you to survive and also helps to give some credence to any story of a persistent conspiracy against yourself. And other matters of governance may not be such a priority. That is the main problem that we're facing here. Either he knew or he didn't care much about these governance issues because he was too preoccupied with the issues of conspiracy and how to survive.
This conspiracy narrative, some of the people that were mentioned yesterday, Ridi Tlabi reportedly talking to people about a deal to do a movie about him. There's a sentiment that he's just introducing random names, but as a form of a build-up to eventually bring in bigger names in this conspiracy theory. Your thoughts on this?
There is no doubt that in this narrative of conspiracy, he's trying to draw in people, especially those who are his political opponents. But there is a problem there. In South Africa, we've used the notion of conspiracies and people being spies so generously that it is beginning to lose meaning. You remember some within the ANC would say Steve Biko was a CIA. ANC used to say the entire ANC is an agent of CIA, of British intelligence. Peter Mokabas and many others were accused of being spies. The problem with those conspiracies is that it's very difficult to prove them either way. But one little challenge here is if former President Jacob Zuma is recruited as a student in Lesotho, why as a chief of intelligence would he have allowed him to rank or work in such a sensitive space as the one of foreign? Why would he have allowed him to rise to the premier of Limpopo? And why would he even appoint him to his cabinet? Either there is no substance to this, or there was a catastrophic failure of ANC intelligence to report when there is such a threat. Because you can't have both narratives being true. Therefore, the whole has been reduced into something that you will occasionally use when your opponent is standing up against you. The same manner the notion of counter-revolution is used. Whenever somebody is not agreeing with you, you say it's a counter-revolution. And in the same manner, the one of the spies is being used here.
What are your thoughts about day 2 of this testimony?
Well, I like it to continue along the same lines of bringing in all names of political opponents and also creative of conspiracy. It might as well be that the commission itself will have to think very carefully on how they take the evidence that was presented before and go to specific incidents, one after the other, to test their validity, or else they might spend days entertaining one theory of conspiracy on top of the other, something that is almost impossible to prove.
If you put yourself in the place of the Deputy Chief Justice, how do you take into consideration the conspiracy allegations, but also want to make a former president who signed an oath of office accountable for his own personal actions?
Well, that's where the difficulty is. I would allow him to vent in the first few days, but later on come back to what this commission and its substance is all about. Were there private individuals in government who collaborated with people outside or in business in an irregular manner where corruption was allowed? And if so, what could have been the role of the president directly or indirectly, or what could have been his role in preventing such? That's where I would try to force this particular investigation into that particular space. For example, the landing of the Coopers in the Air Force Base, which is often saved for heads of state. How could that be part of a conspiracy? instead of an abuse of a relationship by private business people. The same with Bosasa, the same with many others, because this is not just confined to the Gupta family.
Dr. Somadoda Fikeni, thank you so much for making the time to talk to us this morning.
Thank you.
Blaine?